367 at the bottom of the page. We're looking, again, as I said, at the ABCs of Christian maturity. We've come a long way. We're on letter W. And so far, what we have discussed, if I can find the list here. Hey now, I just turned that on. So far, what we've discussed are the following letters. I'm just going to give you the first one. It's A, and then you all know what all of them are after that, right? So A was apostasy. Then we have the bride of Christ, the crucified life, divorce, education, financial freedom, the gifts of the Spirit, hell, Israel, judging and discerning, the kingdom of God, liberty, legalism, and license, the mysteries of God, numerology, offenses, precepts, principles, and preferences, qualifications of officers, repentance, sin, suffering, and sickness, the tabernacle, the unseen world, the preacher's vocation, and we're currently talking about the role of women. Going to finish that tonight, Lord willing. And next week we're going to begin letter X, which is excuses. I know that excuses starts with E, but for our purposes, we are going to deal with that subject as letter X. So it is spelled correctly on the page there. In my book, it is the same, but then at the front where it lists them, it actually just has X and then cuses. So, but we'll be doing. Then letter Y is youth, and then letter Z is zeal. So we're going to be moving along in these, and when we finish the ABCs, we're going to be moving our Sunday school lessons from Sunday morning to Wednesday night. So the plan, not the new Sunday school, but our current Sunday school, Landmarks of Baptist Doctrine, that will move to Wednesday nights beginning when we finish this. So we'll take a break from Landmarks until this is done. So here we are looking at the widow women. In 1 Timothy chapter number 5, verses 3 through 16, it gives us the special regulations covering excuse me, the way Baptist churches are to respond to widows in their membership. So let's go ahead and read this passage real quick here. It says, in case you don't, hopefully you do have your Bible. This saves us a little bit of time to read it off of here, but you are more than welcome and encouraged to turn to the passages as you have the opportunity. It'll just help you to get through it. Now, the other thing is, before I call out the passage, it's already on the screen. So you see 1 Timothy 5, verses 3 through 16, so you'll know where to turn before I even tell you, because it's on the board. So honor widows that are widows indeed. If any widow have children or nephews, let them learn first to show piety at home and to requite their parents, for that is good and acceptable before God. Now this is speaking of the widows. I'm trying not to get too far into the lesson as I'm reading it, but this is speaking of the widow's children, how they ought to respond to their widow mother. It says here that they should requite their parents or take care of them, basically. So, or return the favor, so to speak, as they've been cared for. Verse number 5, now she that is a widow indeed and desolate trusteth in God, and continueth in supplications and prayers night and day. But she that liveth in pleasure is dead while she liveth. And these things give in charge, that they may be blameless. But if any provide not for his own, and specially for those of his own house, he hath denied the faith and is worse than an infidel. This is speaking of those who are to provide for the widows of their own house, those that are in their own family, whether they be a mother or an aunt. Verse number 9 says, let not a widow be taken into the number under 60 years old, having been the wife of one husband, well reported of for good works, if she have brought up children, if she have lodged strangers, if she have washed the saints' feet, if she have relieved the afflicted, if she have diligently followed every good work. But the younger widows refuse. For when they have begun to wax wanton against Christ, they will marry, having damnation because they have cast off their first faith. And withal they learn to be idle, wandering from house to house, and not only idle, but tattlers also, and busybodies, speaking things which they ought not. I will therefore that the younger women marry, bear children, guide the house, give none occasion to the adversary to speak reproachfully. For some are already turned aside after Satan. Verse number 16 says, if any man or woman that believeth have widows, let them relieve them, and let not the church be charged, that it may relieve them that are widows indeed. So as we look here, we're going to look at two kinds of widows being identified here. And we're probably going to get done with this a little early tonight. We don't have a whole lot to deal with, so we'll just keep on rolling along here. So two type of widows identified. First, there are the widows indeed, verses 3, 5, and 16, which we already read, so I'm going to skip over those there. And then the second one, I'm just going to skip down to the second one here, and then we'll come back, and that is the younger widows. Yes, the younger widows, and that's in verse number 11. But we'll go ahead and look here at the widows indeed. Letter A, it says that she is, as you already answered, desolate. In other words, she has no children, no nephews, no other relatives to take care of her, right? Verse number 5 refers to a widow indeed. So, a widow indeed and is desolate. So she doesn't have anyone else to depend on or rely on. And so, because of that, letter B here says that she is totally depending upon God. Letter C says that she is a prayer warrior. Doesn't exactly use the word warrior, but where are we at here? Verse 5. I skipped it.
Well, B and C are both the same.
Right. But it says that she continueth in supplications and prayers night and day, which is what a prayer warrior does, right? But we use the term prayer warrior, right? That's why he's got it kind of in quotes there. Letter D, that she is over 60 years old. So 60. Y'all know what scores are, right? It's what you get when you win a point in the game. No. Score is 20 years. So that is a score, yes. So, yeah, you're thinking of what Abraham Lincoln said. He said 80 and 7 years ago. How many years was that? 87 years ago, yeah. So, anyhow, a score is 20. In case you didn't know that, now you know. You learned a new word tonight. So 60 is 60 years old. Letter E here, she has never been divorced and remarried. Verse number 9, as it says, having been the wife of one man. And notice that there's a difference there in the language compared to 1 Timothy chapter 3, as it says, must be, and this says having been. So this is a different scenario. And generally speaking, and by the way, I don't believe that it just means she hasn't been divorced and remarried. I believe it means that she's not been married to more than one man. Not just at a time, but at all. And some would say, well, wait a minute. What if her husband died and she remarried? It says, having been the wife of one man. I don't see the word divorce in there at all. But that would apply just as if her husband died and she got remarried. In other words, someone who was not a widow indeed and her husband died and she remarried doesn't qualify to be a widow indeed when she's older. So I know that may not feel right, but it's what the verse says. So, however, usually if a woman is married one time around and doesn't have any children the first time, then sometimes she will either have children or bear children the second time around, or she will have stepchildren, which are now her children, and they will have the responsibility to care for their stepmother when she's old, and if their father dies, then they have that responsibility. And you say, well, why is that the case? Well, in the biblical situation, the stepmother will be the only mother alive, because the first mother would have died in order to have the stepmother marry their father. Does that make sense? In a biblical scenario. But still yet, once that marriage happens, even though the mother's a stepmother and not a quote-unquote real mother, as we would try to say today, she still becomes the responsibility of the children to make sure that she's cared for. Once that marriage happens, she is a part of that house. And so the passage that we went to, or the passage as we read through there, where it says, he that provideth not for his own, right, especially they of his own household, hath denied the faith and is worse than an infidel, that includes someone who married into your household. Makes sense? By the way, it also includes your aunts. It says nephews, right? So, anyhow, some other things that are mentioned here, or letter F here, it says that she is well reported of for good works, right? Verse number 10 tells us that, and then it names some of those good works, right? She's maintained a wonderful testimony of a godly woman. And then we have the younger women, right? We've already answered that blank there, the younger women. While by no means so in every case. Some, as verse 15 says, this passage notes some tendencies with these kinds of widows. They are more likely to, now this doesn't mean in every case, right? We just read that. Doesn't mean in every case, but they're more likely to, in some cases, become pleasure-loving, go out into the world, right? Verse number 6 there. It says, liveth in pleasure, or she that liveth in pleasure is dead while she liveth. Then letter B, she will wax wanton. Y'all know what wax means? The stuff you put on the floor, right? No, it's not what it means. In this passage, the word wax means to become wanting, right? Ever heard of a waxing gibbous? Say, what in the world is that? It is, or a waxing crescent, right? It's not a croissant, it's a crescent. It's a phase of the moon, right? And waxing means that it's becoming larger, right? It's coming, it's becoming. So you have waxing and waning, right? Waning means to go away. So when you have the full moon, on either side of the full moon, if you're coming up to the full moon from the new moon is what? Dark. You don't see any moon. But it begins to wax more and more light. And so you have a waxing crescent first, and then you have various stages of that. Then you have a waxing gibbous, and then you have the full moon, and then you have a waning gibbous and a waning crescent, and you have a new moon. There's stuff in between there too, but I don't remember what it is. But just giving you an example of waxing and waning. So waxing wanton does not mean that she becomes one of those little things that you eat at the China buffet. Wanton means, not wonton, wanton, having to do with, what's that? Being needy. Yeah, not being able to be satisfied. Needing that pleasure stuff, right? And in other words, in this sense, it says go after men in order to remarry. Now, as you're going to find in the passage, in the context, it is not wrong for the younger women to remarry. In fact, he says for them to remarry. However, it's wrong if they're remarrying solely for the purpose of pleasure, right? And by the way, if that's the case, they have waxed wanton, which means that their needs, quote unquote needs that they think they have, their wants, are not going to be fulfilled. The issue, rather than focusing in on what she ought to focus in on, as he says, we'll get there in a minute. Bear children, guide the house, and all that. It says that these who do that, letter C, they cast off their first Faith. Word is faith. Verse number 12 there, as it states. Letter D, they become idle wanderers, right? They learn to be idle, wandering from house to house. And not only idle, but they become tattlers and busybodies, speaking things which they ought not. So there you go. Letter B here. This is what we do in the way of relieving widows. And by the way, as we've discussed and many times in the past, the purpose of the offering, this is one of the purposes of the offering in church. Your tithes are to take care of people, not property. So the primary purpose is to take care of the church staff, so to speak, the pastor, and those who minister to the people, right? And then the secondary as well is going to be widows indeed, which, by the way, are those who minister to people, right? You can't deny the fact that she is one who ministers. She's a prayer warrior. She depends on God, and the church provides for her. She's well reported of for good works, and she's constantly involved in those things. And so that is why she's cared for, right? So that's the purpose there. And so that relief, caring for them, is going to be taken care of. However, the first avenue of relief, see, even if a widow is more than 60 years old, there is something that can cause her to not be a widow indeed. By the way, that doesn't make her any less of a person. But a widow indeed is one who is able to be cared for by the church, right? So if she's there's that one qualification. What is that? That she has children, right? If she has children or nephews, they're supposed to take care of her, right? That doesn't diminish what she's able to do in the ministry. It just means that if there's a way for family to care for her first, then she shouldn't be chargeable to the church, as we see in our passage that we read there. But the first, so in other words, again, the first avenue of relief in verses 4 and 16 here, it says, but if any widow have children or nephews, let them learn first to show piety at home and to requite their parents, for that is good and acceptable before God. Now, obviously, it doesn't mention their parents and their aunt, but it applies, as he said, children or nephews. And then verse 16 says, if any man or woman that believeth have widows, let them relieve them, and let not the church be charged, that it may relieve them that are widows indeed. However, if they have no one, they have no children, by the way, that doesn't mean that their children grew up and said, I don't care. Their children still have the responsibility to take care of them. And if they don't, well, we heard what he said, that denied the faith and they're worse than an infidel. That's because it is something that we're told to do. In the early years of family life, parents lay up for the children, right? In 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verse number 14, behold, the third time the third time I am ready to come to you, and I will not be burdensome to you, for I seek not yours but you. For the children ought not to lay up for the parents, but the parents for the children. That's in the early years, and he's referring really to his spiritual children, but he's also pointing out the fact that these Corinthians are still children when they should be adults. They should be see the Corinthians, and that's, by the way, one of the reasons Paul would not accept from them. He would accept from, he said he robbed other churches, and that doesn't mean that he went and stole stuff from other churches. What he means is he took wages from other churches while he ministered to them. And the reason he did that is because they were not mature enough to be able to handle that. They were still children, and so in his eyes, he needed to care for them. But the time would come, it didn't for them, at least as far as we know, the time would come when the when that would go the other way around, right? So you have the first avenue of relief there being, again, in the early years. Hopefully it'll stay shut. Welcome, welcome. In the early years, as we said, parents lay up for the children, but then we have in the declining years, children are to requite or give back in return to their parents. I gave you the blank there, it was parents. As we're looking at the role of women, we're looking at the widow women. Not to be, anyways, the widow women. So we had the first avenue of relief for widows there. Well, we talked about the two kinds of widows, widows indeed, and the younger widows. Then we look at the the relief of widows being the first avenue was what their children. Second avenue of relief here in verse number 14. We'll read it in a second. God's will God's will is that the younger widows remarry, right? And establish regular family life. As verse 14 says, I will therefore that the younger women marry, bear children, guide the house, give none occasion to the adversary to speak reproachfully. And then, let's see here. 1 Corinthians chapter 7, verses 8 and 9 says, I say therefore to the unmarried and widows, it is good for them to, if they abide even as I, but if they cannot contain, let them marry, for it is better to marry than to burn. Verse number, trying to skip on to the next thing there. The third line of relief, verse 16, the church is responsible only to relieve them that are widows indeed, right? Again, that's not to diminish the importance or the value of those widows who are not widows indeed. It's simply just pointing out that those who are widows indeed are the only ones that the church is to care for, right? And again, if they have children, right, that first line of relief or first avenue of relief, they're supposed to be cared for by their family. Letter A here, there was a daily ministration for the widows of the church at Jerusalem, right? In Acts chapter number 6 and verse number 1, it says, in days when the number of the disciples was multiplied, there was a murmuring of the Grecians against the Hebrews because their widows were neglected in the daily ministration, right? So that just pointing out that there was a daily ministration. The whole issue of the supposed neglect there is another discussion, but we see though that there was a daily ministration, right? So that daily ministration was a daily care for those widows, right? What would that be in the form of, you think? They showed up and got their daily check. Is that what you think that's what it was? No, they're fed for the most part, and then they're provided for the things that they need, right? And they did that on a daily basis. I suppose that worked best for them, right, as far as their resources. And then, letter B here, it says, pure and undefiled religion is to visit the widows in their affliction, right? In James chapter 1, verse 27 says, pure religion and undefiled before God and the Father is this, to visit the fatherless and widows in their affliction and to keep himself unspotted from the world. And if you are going to memorize the memory verse, which I encourage you to do so, in Titus chapter 2, verses 3 through 5 here, especially ladies, especially mature ladies, says the aged women likewise that they be in behavior as becometh holiness, not false accusers, not given to much wine, teachers of good things, that they may teach the young women to be sober, to love their husbands, to love their children, to be discreet, chaste, keepers at home, good, obedient to their own husbands, that the word of God be not blasphemed. And that covers all the material that we have for the role of women.